Ever get the feeling like we're stuck with these Band-Aid solutions? Like we just
Mhm.
keep patching up the same systems instead of, I don't know, really trying something new.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, get ready to ditch the metaphorical bandages because on today's Deep Dive, we are diving into some radical rethinks.
Oh, I like the sound of that already.
Yeah, we're talking about completely new ways of approach, well, everything. Money, housing, how we govern ourselves, you name it. And I know you're all about more compassionate social models, ways to reward contributions that aren't just about, the size of your bank account.
Absolutely.
So we dug into this collection of articles, read for free, book better to best, and let me tell you, these authors are not afraid of a little revolution on paper.
It's true. These articles don't just complain about the problems. They actually offer really concrete alternatives.
Yeah.
And they even have a name for it that really makes you stop and think. Compassionate meritocracy.
Right. You almost never hear those two words in the same sentence. It's like, what happens when you blend the best of capitalism and socialism? Give it a good shape and see what comes out.
Exactly. And I think what struck me is that they don't just stop at these big ideas. They actually dive into the practical details of how these systems could actually work.
Yeah, like, for example, how they talk about rewarding contributions differently, not just the traditional jobs and wages, but making space for things like artistic creation, community involvement, even just, acts of kindness. Those could actually hold real value in the economy.
Exactly. That's where this whole creative currency octaves concept comes into play. Imagine a system where, beyond having your basic needs met, you earn additional currency, but it's based on how much your contributions are valued by society.
Okay, so it's not about everyone getting exactly the same, but everyone having a fair shot. And those who really create things others find valuable, they're rewarded in a way that actually reflects that value.
Exactly. Think about it. Writing a novel that moves people deeply could earn you more than, say, a data entry job, because it's seen as contributing something unique and valuable to the world.
It's like saying we value creativity, we value innovation, we value community spirit just as much as we might value, say, financial success. And that's going to be reflected in how our economy actually functions.
And they give a real-world example, the Berkshire's local currency. It's been around for years, and it really shows that people are open to new ways of exchanging value, ways that are grounded in their local community.
It's a cool parallel because it shows that these aren't just, pie-in-the-sky ideas. There are models out there, things we can learn from and draw inspiration from. But they don't just stop at economics, right? I mean, they get into things like governance, how decisions are made, right?
Absolutely. One of the boldest ideas they propose is this idea of a fourth branch of government. Imagine a digital platform where citizens can directly propose, debate, and vote on policies.
So kind of like direct democracy meets the 21st century. I'm picturing some kind of massive online forum, but with actual real-world legislative power. That is a pretty radical departure from what we're used to.
It is. And it gets at this desire we're seeing all over the world for more transparency, more citizen participation in government. They argue that by giving people a more direct say in how their society is run, you can create a government that's more engaged, more responsive to the needs of the people.
It's that shift from power being concentrated in the hands of a few to being distributed among the many, which I think ties in beautifully with this whole idea of a compassionate meritocracy, where everyone has a voice, everyone has a chance to contribute. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's break this down a bit. What does compassionate meritocracy even mean? Because, those are two words you don't usually see paired together. It seems kind of counterintuitive. How can you have a system that's both compassionate and meritocratic?
That's where they really challenge the assumptions we often make. See, they argue that true merit, true achievement, shouldn't just be about individual success. It should be about how that success contributes to the well-being of everyone.
So it's not enough to simply be successful in the traditional sense. You have to be successful in a way that lifts others up, creates a more just and equitable world for everyone.
Exactly. And they suggest that a society that values compassion just as highly as merit might look radically different from the one we live in today.
Okay, you've got me hooked. So how do they propose we actually build this compassionate meritocracy? Where do we even begin?
Well, they start with the foundation, making sure everyone has what they need to just exist.
Right,
Yeah.
the bare minimum.
Yeah, and that's where universal basic income comes in, UBI. But so, of course, they add a little twist, those creative currency octaves we were talking about.
Yes. Okay, more on that. Because I have to admit, whenever I hear octaves, I think music theory, not like social revolution.
It's a catchy name, for sure. But it actually does a really good job of explaining the idea. So picture this. Everyone gets a base income, those basic bucks we mentioned, enough to cover the essentials, food, place to live, healthcare. That's like the root, no, the base level.
Okay, I get it. The starting point, everyone's at least at that level. But
Yeah.
then the octaves, what are those exactly?
So now imagine that on top of that basic income, you can earn more currency, but it's based on how much you're contributing to society as a whole. Like each level of contribution is like going up an octave on a musical scale.
So if you're someone who's, I don't know, volunteering at a shelter, teaching kids to read, creating art that inspires people, you're moving up those octaves. You're earning more of that creative currency.
You got it. And here's the really interesting part. The higher the octave you reach, the more valuable that creative currency becomes. So let's say your work is considered, I don't know, incredibly beneficial to society. Maybe you wrote a scientific paper that changes everything or composed a symphony that makes people cry. Well, your creative currency, it might be exchangeable for traditional money at a way higher rate.
Okay, I see how the meritocracy part comes in. But, and maybe this is obvious, this brings up a ton of questions, like who gets to decide what's symphony worthy? What contributions are more valuable?
Yeah, and that's one of the big challenges the book tackles head on. They propose this whole multi-layered system, peer review, community input, expert evaluation, and it's all designed to be as transparent and, well, democratic as possible.
So it's not some council of elders deciding what's good and bad. It's more about a nuanced, participatory way of figuring out that value.
Exactly. And keep in mind, this is all built on the idea that everyone's basic needs are met from the get-go. No one's struggling just to survive. It's about recognizing that people contribute in tons of ways, many of which our current systems just don't even measure.
It's true. If you really think about it, the way we define work is so limited. It doesn't include so much of what actually keeps communities going: unpaid, labor, caregiving, all of that.
Absolutely. And the book's argument is that if we can expand how we define valuable contributions, we can create an economy that reflects the real diversity of human activity.
It's like aligning our values with the way we actually structure our economy.
Yeah.
Instead of just incentivizing like pure wealth accumulation, we're incentivizing well-being, creativity, community support, things like that. But okay, let's address the elephant in the room. How do you actually fund a system like this? I mean, it sounds amazing, but money doesn't magically appear out of nowhere.
You're telling me. That's the billion-dollar question, or, well, maybe the trillion-dollar question at this point. The authors have a few ideas, though. One is that by creating this new form of currency, the basic bucks and creative currency, you're essentially building an entirely separate economy running on different rules.
So it's less about taking money from one group to give to another and more about creating a whole new system with its own logic, its own way of valuing things.
Exactly. They also bring up the fact that, well, automation's changing everything,
Yeah.
right? Jobs are changing, industries are changing. Maybe we need to rethink our whole approach to work and income entirely.
It makes sense. We're already seeing that disruption, all those changes in the workforce. It's not that crazy to think we might need new economic models to keep up.
That's what they're saying. And a system that recognizes those human contributions beyond just, clocking in and out. Maybe that's one way to handle this whole shift. But they don't stop there. Their vision gets even bigger. They get into redesigning our physical spaces, too.
Right. The colored zones. They get into urban planning and some, if I'm remembering right, some pretty wild ideas about how we design the places we live. Tell me more about that. Okay, colored zones. Now that's a name that gets the imagination going.
It's definitely memorable. And yeah, it has that future of society kind of vibe. It's like this, they propose setting aside different areas with very specific purposes.
Like zoning laws on steroids?
Kind of.
Hmm.
But the big goal is to actually make things better. Reduce conflict, increase well-being, that sort of thing.
All right, so paint me a picture. What would these colored zones actually look like? Give me an example.
Okay, imagine a zone that's designed specifically for families with young kids. So parks everywhere, playgrounds, maybe even community daycare centers. The whole thing geared towards creating this really safe, supportive environment for raising kids.
Makes sense. So you wouldn't put like a heavy metal club right next door.
Probably not. Or think about it as a zone specifically for artists and creative types. So you'd have affordable live workspaces, shared studios, places to put on shows, a little haven where people can collaborate and inspire each other.
So it's about communities tailored to different needs, different lifestyles, but it's also about being more intentional with our cities, right? Like not just letting them grow randomly, but actually thinking about how different ways of life can coexist, without driving each other crazy.
Exactly. And they actually take it even further into this whole reimagining of justice and rehabilitation.
Oh, right. This is where things get really interesting. They propose these hollow zones, if I'm remembering right, which are essentially what self-governing communities for people who've committed crimes. Talk about a different approach.
Right. It's a complete 180 from how we do prisons now.
Yeah.
Which the book argues is, well, not exactly working. Too expensive, often makes social problems worse, and doesn't really help people get back on their feet.
So instead of locking people away, the idea is to build spaces where they can rebuild, learn skills, be part of something.
Exactly. It's about shifting the focus. Instead of just punishment, it's about restoring things for the individual and the community. Of course, it brings up all these questions about safety, accountability, how to make sure people are safe.
And the book addresses those concerns.
Oh, yeah, for sure. They're very clear that these hollow zones would have to be designed really carefully with tons of support, clear rules, and ways to hold people accountable. It's not about just letting anyone do whatever. It's about trying something new. Because, let's face it, the old way isn't exactly a shining success story.
It's definitely a bold idea, and I think it gets at something that runs through this whole book. Questioning the way things are, the way we assume society has to be.
Totally. I mean, this whole deep dive has been about looking at alternatives. And whether you agree with every single idea or not, you can't deny that their main point is powerful. We need to find ways to live together that are more compassionate, more sustainable, more fair.
And I think the idea that really stuck with me is how they redefine what it means to be elite. They're not talking about money or power or who you know.
Yeah.
They're talking about the good you put out into the world.
Yeah, totally. Shifting from what's in it for me
Yeah.
to how do we all rise together?
It's a powerful vision, this idea of a future where things are just better, more human. And they admit making these ideas reality, that's a huge shift, but they also think it's one worth fighting for.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's something we can all connect with, no matter what our background is. We all have a part to play in building a better future. The first step is just allowing ourselves to imagine it.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the compassionate meritocracy, we'll leave you with this. Imagine that world. A world where everyone has what they need, where contributing to society is just as important as how much money you make, where everyone has the chance to thrive. In that world, who are the real elites? What does a truly successful life actually look like?
That's something to think about. Until next time, keep asking those questions, keep exploring those possibilities, keep diving deep.